Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from around the world, including those of you smart enough to be watching us on your phones using the portable TV app. So all over the world, but especially here in the United States, there is a ticking time bomb that is becoming an enormous threat to potentially every baby that's born in America. I want to start this discussion this way. So, do you know what a PFAS is? Do you know? You probably should. It's essentially a fluoropolymer. It sounds really technical, but think of it this way. When you wear a jacket like this one, or a pair of pants, or when you use a pan, like a frying pan with a non-stick surface, or an umbrella, or a raincoat, really just about anything that resists water or grease or heat or oil. The reason it's able to do so is because it has like a coating on it. That coating is applied to those things, and that's the fluoropolymer, right? It's everywhere, including in our drinking water. So every single time you have a cup of coffee, every single time you have a drink of water, just about anything, once you consume it, it stays in you forever. In fact, you know what's even worse? It accumulates. That's why this polyfluoromer is actually nicknamed by scientists the forever chemical. The forever chemical. Think about that. So what's the news here? What's different? Why am I starting this newscast off with this story today? So it's this. There's a new wrinkle, and this is bad, folks. There's a new study that just tested the breast milk of American women. There's 50 states in the United States, right? So what they found is particularly worrisome. They collected 50 samples. Every single one of them showed, on average, levels of fluoropolymers 2,000 times higher. First, and 2,000 times higher than what is considered safe, even in drinking water, for the rest of us. So what are we learning from that? Well, think about it. We already knew, right, that it's a growing concern for all of us today. But what this study seems to tell us is that it's even bigger, potentially, to every baby who is or will be born in the years to come. And remember, again, it's called the forever chemical. So whatever the baby is born with, whatever the baby starts with or starts his life or her life with, that's just the beginning. So what are we going to do for you? Well, we're going to drill down on this. We're going to drill down right here on the news with Rick Sanchez, because this is really an important story, something we should all know about, right? And of course, because we think it is time to do news again. All right, so what are you going to come away with today after watching this newscast? Well, we think it's this. You're going to ask this question: are we poisoning our babies for the sake of a convenient coating? Is a bizarre beam causing brain injuries to U.S. spies? And President Biden says Russia was not involved in the pipeline hack. Why is that not sitting well with certain network anchors? All right, you know, I can't think of anything more important than the health of a newborn baby. Can you? So imagine learning that every single baby that's born in America that is breastfed is taking 2,000 times the level considered safe of a dangerous chemical, one that could result in them coming down eventually with cancer or liver disease or thyroid disease, or passing on birth defects to future generations. This screams for action to be taken, right? Is it? That's one of the questions that we're asking. Joining us now is attorney Sara Papantonio. She specializes in these types of cases at the law firm Levin, Papantonio, and Rafferty. Boy, great to have you, Sara. I can't wait to try and get a better understanding, because I, as a parent, and I think every single human being who's watching us right now, is wondering why we're not doing anything, or what are we doing to try and deal with this problem, because it seems very serious.
It's absolutely serious. I mean, you broke it down yourself. Breast milk is supposed to contain nutrients that allow a child to grow. It's not supposed to contain a human toxin, especially a human toxin that is biopersistent, bioaccumulative, bioactive. And to break that down even further, what biopersistent means is that that toxin, PFAS, will never leave that baby's system. What bioaccumulative means is that every new exposure to PFAS will stay in that child's system. And then what bioactive means is that since that PFAS has nowhere to go in that child's system, it's going to attach to the organs, and it's going to affect the organs. And so this is what's going into a child's body in the first days, months of its life. It's been being exposed to a cancer-causing toxin, and it'll remain in that child's body for the rest of its life. It might even pass it down to its future children.
This is amazing. And I imagine, knowing what you just said, and knowing that this could be in the body of every child who's breastfed by his mother in America, our government, somebody is definitely doing something about this to maybe even just stop the manufacturing of this coating, right?
Absolutely. And what we're doing, what our firm is doing, is we're taking legal action. We're filing lawsuits against these companies, because the companies that manufactured these drugs knew for years that this PFAS was biopersistent, that it was going to stay in the environment for millions of years. But instead of telling the federal government, instead of telling the EPA, they kept it to themselves. And now we're finding out 40 years later what these companies have known the entire time, that this is a human toxin. So we're absolutely taking legal action, and I hope that the government's going to follow in suit.
So right now, as it stands in America, are products still being coated with this stuff that's getting into our drinking water, or has that stopped?
We're certainly in a state where we're understanding the effects of it, and then we're rolling out different avenues that we can take them out. But understand that this stuff is on everything. Ugh. It is everywhere you look. Like you described, it's in kitchens, it's in pesticides, it's in all products that we rely on day by day. So it's not just going to evaporate, it's not going to go away immediately.
Sara Papantonio, boy, you're good. You really understand this thing. Let's have more discussions about this. It's certainly something that we should be talking about every chance we get. Thank you once again. There is another story besides the Colonial Pipeline that involves the CIA and hacking and some measures of media hysteria. Remember those so-called sonic attacks of U.S. diplomats in Cuba that turned out to be caused by crickets? Well, now the U.S. government is saying that these attacks are back and much more widespread, and that U.S. spies are the ones who are supposedly being targeted. RT correspondent John Huddy picks up this complex story from here.
Between late 2016 and 2017, more than 36 U.S. diplomats in Havana, Cuba, reported hearing high-pitched sounds, kind of like crickets, while they were at home or staying in hotels. The so-called sonic attacks have since been dubbed the Havana Syndrome. Later in 2018, U.S. diplomats in China reported the same type of mysterious sounds and illness, along with Americans posted in Russia. Well, now, the number of Americans reportedly sickened by the mysterious sonic attack illness has grown to more than 130 people and counting. The New York Times reports that since December, at least 3 CIA officers have reported serious health effects from episodes overseas. One occurred within the past 2 weeks, and all have required the officers to undergo outpatient treatment at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center or other facilities. China, Cuba, and Russia have all denied involvement. U.S. officials have called the attacks unacceptable and have demanded answers. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine reported in 2020 the strange and mysterious illnesses appeared to have been caused by, quote, directed pulsed radio frequency RF energy. Translation, microwave radiation waves. The report stops short, though, of saying it was an attack and doesn't blame any particular country, though it does note previous research on this type of injury has also been done in the former Soviet Union, reading studies published in the open literature more than a half-century ago and over the subsequent decades by Western and Soviet sources provide circumstantial support for this possible mechanism. Politico reported this week some U.S. officials are pointing fingers at Russia's GRU military intelligence unit for being behind the alleged attacks, though without a, quote, smoking gun or any definitive evidence. The CIA has reportedly created a special investigative unit looking into both these past and recent attacks, and the Biden administration is also reportedly assisting with the investigation. And so the mystery of the so-called sonic attacks continues. For the News with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
Thanks so much, John. This is the News with Rick Sanchez, and when we come back, movies in outer space? Really? And by the way, it's a race. Who's going to be the first to do it? We'll explain when we come back. We have cameras that are pointed at different parts of Gaza and Jerusalem as the situation escalates there. Welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. That's what you're looking at right there. What began as a forced removal of Palestinians from their homes in the suburb of Jerusalem has now turned into a full-scale attack. As we reported here last night, the Israeli Defense Forces have now sent in ground troops in what is a full-scale assault on Palestinian communities in the West Bank and in parts of Gaza. This thing is getting much more complicated, much more dangerous, and apparently much more aggressive. Here's RT correspondent Paula Sleer. She files this report from the fighting.
The sirens are sounding here in Tel Aviv. I've just woken up and I'm just going to walk through the apartment to go outside and see what's happening. So I'm just switching on the lights because it's about 1 o'clock in the morning and they're coming from that direction, and there's usually a pause after the sirens and then an explosion as to where the rockets have landed. This is not the direction one should be moving in. Actually, most people are sleeping in sheltered rooms. I was sleeping in a sheltered room up until now. All people should be hunkering down. But I just want to show you what it's like here when the rockets sound. So if we go here and you walk with me, you can also see the roads are completely quiet. Tel Aviv is a busy city, and normally the roads are busy at this time. There is absolutely no one or nothing on the streets. Now is the pause I told you about, and then after a moment or so, there should be an explosion, and that will be the Iron Dome anti-missile defense system intercepting with the rocket. There it is. There it is. It's quite far away, so it doesn't seem as if the rocket landed in Tel Aviv. It sounded a little bit off to that direction. But for this reason, at least 5 million Israelis are hunkering down in bomb shelters tonight. Wow, that sounds a bit loud. That's coming from there, so that's quite close to where we are. I really shouldn't be out right now. I should make my way back to the shelter room where I was sleeping up until a minute ago. Paula Sleer, RT, Tel Aviv.
We thank Paula Sleer for sharing that perspective with us of what it's like to actually be covering what has turned into a war zone overnight. When it comes to competing in space, Russia and the United States, they're at it again. This time the two countries are neck and neck in a race to see who can put the first star in space. No, not that kind of star. We mean a Hollywood star, right? And let's see how many movie references we can stick into this story as well while we're at it. This is a fascinating story. Who better than Alex Mihailovich to tell you about it? Here he is.
He once aspired to make movies around the world.
I want to make films in different countries with different actors and crews.
But now, Tom Cruise has his eyes focused on the cosmos, taking what would have once been thought of as a mission impossible and turning it into mission probable. Taking a lead role in a real-life drama, Tom Cruise is planning to film an upcoming movie on the International Space Station in October. With the backing of NASA and Tesla CEO Elon Musk, the superstar will be joined by director Doug Liman for a film shoot in space. But Cruise and his team of a few good men are not alone. A competing film crew from far and away also aims to be the top gun in shooting a movie in space. And just like 60 years ago, once again, the rivals to the hopeful American space pioneers are Russian. Around the same time Cruise is set to arrive at the ISS, a Russian actor and director are scheduled to reach the space station, on October 5th, to be exact. Popular Russian stage, TV, and film actor Yulia Peresild is taking her talents to the edge. and is set to star in a film directed by Klim Shipenko. At this point, it is unclear whether the American-made team or their Russian counterparts will be the first to arrive. But if by chance they were to get to the ISS at the same time, things could get a little cramped. Don't believe it? Just ask a cosmonaut.
Sometimes there are moments when it's impossible not to be together with other cosmonauts at the ISS. Sometimes several people work at the station at one place. It becomes tight sometimes, but in general, we try not to bother each other.
While this is far from being a war of the worlds, it will take all the right moves to get there first. While the Russians and the American film crews must know that this is a risky business, both teams seem determined to have their country be the first to film a movie in space. In the end, nobody likes losing it. Well, at least when it comes to a space race. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Joining us now to talk more about this is Aaron Pagel. He's a professor of strategy and economics at DePaul University in Chicago. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us. This is a fascinating story. Why the sudden fascination with space?
Is it sudden? I think we're all very excited about space, and we've all been growing up, at least speaking from my 35, 36 years old, like we're all excited about this. So I think maybe what you're commenting on is why are things happening so quickly now? And it's because there's a lot of new innovation and new technology.
I was just going to say, I mean, you have a great beard, and I got a couple of years on me. My teeth are getting a little longer, as they say. So you and I grew up when space was actually a big, hip thing, and then for a while it was like, it doesn't matter anymore. Now all of a sudden it's so hip, Hollywood's trying to get in on it.
Well, Hollywood's been trying to get on it for a while, right? So what's happened is that the technology to get to space, as well as making films, has all become cheaper and easier. And so what we're seeing now is the ability to implement on those plans and make something that's really stunning. Hollywood can do a lot of great things with special effects, but to be on site, on location, is a big deal.
Yeah, but would it really be any different? I mean, can't they do with special effects what they can do being up in space? Wouldn't it actually be more difficult to do it up there than to do it in a studio?
Probably. In a studio, though, there's two ways to do this, right? You can go full visual effects. You could do, the vomit rocket, as they say, where a plane falls quickly, so you have simulated zero-G, or you can use rigging. And all those things cost money, right? And can sometimes not look very realistic. And we can see just from the International Space Station, the way the clothes land on people, the way people's hair floats, that's a different experience. So yeah, there's probably a cost conversation here, but space is an economy that we're trying to figure out how to access other industries in. And this is actually low-hanging fruit.
There's a part of me that is thinking, Aaron, I don't know if you've had this thought as well, that, there's a lot of great things that we can do in space from the standpoint of research and everything else that we've seen throughout the years. Is this kind of minimizing it to turning it into a place just to make a movie, which is much less important than any of the discoveries and other things you and I experienced, in our lifetime?
One could probably take that perspective. There's this thing about space that's called the overview effect. There's a really great book about it. There's an awesome nonprofit called Space for Humanity. And it's about how astronauts experience seeing the globe, seeing the blackness of space, understanding that there are no country borders that you can see from space. And yeah, you might be able to say that entertainment might be minimizing it, but really we're trying to say that space should be something that we see as very commonplace. We should get to that point. And it's accessing a new industry in space that's going to give us other ways to interact with that place.
And so having Tom Cruise up there, and whoever the Tom Cruise Russian counterpart happens to be, who's the star out there, go there, tells the people, hey, he's just like us. He's not an astronaut. He's just like us, right?
Well, I mean, it's Tom Cruise. He's just like us to some extent.
Well, just like you.
But it is, yeah, just like me. But it's to say that we could, right, and that we should be hopeful about the future, and that we can do this. And there's a lot to be said for that.
This is a fun conversation to have, especially with a guy like you, who's an academic and an intellectual, and you seem to be able to have a good time with this story, just like we did. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Now this, cable news in America reports from distinctive silos, right? Totally distinctive. Like like the sun setting in the west, the swallows returning to Capistrano, you can be sure that Fox News will tell stories about blacks and Hispanics that put them in a bad light. While NBC, or MSNBC, will do any story that involves China, the Chinese, Russia, or the Russians in a bad light. That's just come to be expected. But I want to show you something now as an example of a case where a news presenter seems almost angry about the facts of a story. This is taking it almost to a new height, right? Let me set this up for you. Last night, as we reported, the President of the United States came out and addressed the pipeline attack, assuring Americans of two things. One, that the gas was going to be flowing once again, and two, that the Russian government had nothing to do with the hack, as some in the media had incorrectly reported. That's the finding of the CIA. But that's obviously not the narrative that one particular news presenter wanted to hear. Look at the tone. Listen to the words that she uses when reporting the facts of a story that she obviously doesn't like.
President Biden today, he spoke on the mask announcement, but he also spoke today on the crippling cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline. He ascribed blame for it today, blamed it on a criminal enterprise based in Russia. And he said, very interestingly, that the Russian government itself didn't do it. That it is the conclusion of the FBI that the Russian government isn't responsible for the attack directly. But, he said, the criminal network that did it is based in Russia. And he said the administration is now talking to Moscow directly about how responsible countries should handle criminal enterprises like this that are operating within their borders.
Hackers are a criminal enterprise. Responsible countries have to be taught how to deal with this. I mean, Lee Camp joining us once again. People wrote in and said, we like that guy, we want him back. So here you are once again. What are you thinking when you watch that?
Well, you've heard of mad cow disease. This is a long-going problem. It's called mad owl disease, where there's some sort of brain parasite that gets in there and everything is Russia's fault. And even if the Biden administration or the U.S. government says, yeah, it wasn't the Russian government's fault, you still go, but it was probably the Russian government's fault, right? I mean, that's what she's doing, is like she is upset that something can't be blamed on the Russian government.
But it's not her job to create the narrative. I mean, and I know it happens, and we all, from time to time, journalism isn't perfect, and we all come with our opinions and our, philosophies and our ideologies, but the President of the United States has just given an address where he's saying something she obviously doesn't like, so she writes it or turns it in such a way as to tell the viewer, like the word she uses, I think, is interestingly. Did you hear the president interestingly said the Russians weren't involved? Why would you add that word? Why wouldn't you just say the president said the Russians weren't involved?
Well, exactly. And it's this, many Americans do this, maybe led by Rachel Maddow, but is anything that happens by a Russian in Russia is all the Russian government, right?
That's an interesting point.
Anything at all. But we have hackers in America, here in America. We have hackers that attack the American government.
We have terrorists in America.
That too.
We have criminals in America.
All of those things. And it does not mean the U.S. government is personally responsible for every one of these people. We act like that with Russia, with Iran, with China. Anybody in their country is apparently working for the Russian government. They did the same thing with the Facebook posts during the election. They said, oh, that crazy little meme that was clearly done by this clickbait farm. Oh, that's the Russian government.
Even though they were in London.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were Russians, or we had 2 or 3 Russians who worked there. No, that's an interesting point. And listen, this is not to cover for Russia, neither you nor I. If the Russians do something wrong, I don't care what Putin does right or wrong. That's not my job. My job as a journalist is to tell the facts of the story. Right. And I think what makes this story so interesting is she did not feel comfortable with the facts. And that's not her job.
Yeah. No, not at all. If something can't be blamed on Russia, it's very upsetting to her. And she supposed that things that hadn't happened could be blamed on Russia. Like she famously did a report when it was negative temperatures in, Wisconsin. She said, here are the temperatures in Wisconsin. Imagine if Russia turned off your gas right now. She made up a scenario that had not happened that Russia had done in people's imagination.
Does she do that because there's so much influence from the State Department or, the NSA or whatever in the media today, that she's just kind of being an agent for them? Maybe that's the wrong word, that she's kind of just telling the stories that she thinks they want to hear?
I mean, it's tough to know how much is self-created by her realizing that's where her numbers now are, and how much of it is pressure coming from. We do know a lot of anonymous sources in the intelligence community drop stories that end up being false, like the Russian bounty story. But rather than like cover that a little and say, hey, these are anonymous sources, what is this? Rachel Maddow jumped all over that and said, Russia's paying Taliban to kill people, like, and it all fell apart. It's all collapsed.
And by the way, I think she's a very interesting person, a very smart person, and I agree with like 70% of the stuff she says, but this is beyond the pale.
By the way, she hasn't mentioned Israel or Gaza yet. So
they haven't covered that story?
No.
And you've been watching?
Jeremy Scahill tweeted out, he said, if you search her site and all of her content, no Gaza, Israel.
Fascinating. Thanks, my friend. Appreciate the presence. That's our news. Thanks for being with us. I'm Rick Sanchez. We'll be looking for you again right here when it's time to do news again.